Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Mirjana Pantic. This is MCA 115 News Reporting, and today's lecture is about news leads. What are news leads? We touched upon this in the previous lecture. Every journalism report starts with the lead. The lead represents the first paragraph of a news story. It is the most important part of every story. Whether your lead is good or not really is going to affect whether people are going to read your news story or not. The lead is also the most difficult part to write. Why do you think is the reason for this? It is difficult to say the most important things about an event in a single sentence, in a single paragraph. So that is the reason why leads are really difficult to write. If the lead is well written, there is a likelihood that the readers will be interested in reading your story. Now, there are different types of leads. There are summary leads and alternative leads. I will start with the summary news lead. It is the type of lead that you're most likely to encounter in news stories published in newspapers or in online media, but also this is likely going to be the lead that you're gonna encounter when you watch television news. What is the summary lead? It basically needs to answer, if possible, those 6 questions, 5 W's plus H: who, what, when, where, why, and how. However, it is frequently difficult for us to answer all these questions in a single paragraph. So frequently, you will find news reports where journalists attempt to answer all of these questions, but they usually answer a few, and then the remaining questions will be answered in the second paragraph, or maybe some answers will be provided even later, depending on the event, especially when we're trying to find the answer to the question why something happens. So the background information, like, or explanation of an event might just come to us later, and we'll have later more information and answer that question. But basically, our goal is to answer these questions in the lead or in the lead and the second paragraph of the story. I want to show you some examples of the summary lead. So summary lead basically summarizes an event. It tells us what happened, when it happened, where it happened, how it happened, why it happened, and when it happened. So let's take a look at the first example that I have on the list, because I think that just to provide you some examples will help you understand what the lead of the story is about. This story was from Las Vegas, and it happened on January 1st, 2025. Las Vegas, Associated Press. One person died and 7 more were injured Wednesday when a Tesla truck caught fire and exploded outside President-elect Donald Trump's Las Vegas hotel, authorities said. Now, let's dissect this news lead. Who is affected in this story? So there is one person who died and 7 more who were injured. So this is the who of the story. Now, what happened? What happened is, and this is how we started the news lead. What happened is that one person died and 7 more were injured. When did it happen? It happened on Wednesday. Where did this event happen? It happened in Las Vegas, outside President-elect Donald Trump's hotel. How it happened, like how did these people die? Do you see that in the lead? Well, this happened when a Tesla truck caught fire and exploded. What is missing here? So we have the who, the what, the when, the where, and how. What what question is missing here? We don't know why this happened. We don't know if this was an accident or if somebody set fire, or we don't know why. Why did this happen? Like, why did we have this incident? We know how these people died. So they died because after the truck caught fire, but why? So this is this is like the answer that we will learn the question to later. And at the end of the sentence, you will see authority said, which means that the information we have in the lead of the story is attributed to the source. And then later in the story, you will find out who specifically said this to journalists. Another example of the lead is the Taliban say they will close all national and foreign non-governmental groups in Afghanistan employing women. The latest crackdown on women's rights since they took power in August 2021. And another example of a summary lead. An Argentine judge confirmed charges against 5 people in connection with the death of Liam Payne, a former member of musical group One Direction, and ordered preventive prison for 2 of them for having supplied him with drugs. And this news story is from December 30th, 2024. Now, let's take a look at more examples. The new year is bringing a cold front with it, as multiple blasts of Arctic air are poised to hit much of the United States in the first half of January. So this new story, this is actually the lead of the story that I found on NPR on January 2nd, 2025. And the reason I use this as an example is that I wanted to show you how the lead of the story should look like, because this one is really concise, really straight to the point. And it's actually the best way to write a lead is to try to fit in the most important information in it, but also to be concise. I also found this other example on NPR, also on January 2nd, 2025. And after I took a second look at it, I thought that it would be important to change the lead. Like, I would change it a bit. I feel it's a bit longer than it should be, and there's too many names in the lead of the story. So I would say just that instead of, listing these representatives, I would just say President Biden will award congressional committee members who investigated the January 6, 2021 attack on the US Capitol. And then I will explain in the second paragraph of the story who are the people who are the congressional committee members who will receive the Presidential Citizen Medal award. So that's what I'm saying. So try to be as concise as possible, and then all the things that you didn't mention in the first paragraph that were actually relevant, you can just mention them in the second paragraph. Speaking of that, and the reason why I actually said instead of having all these names and burden the lead in a way, I would rather see you use what we call the delayed identification lead. So I have an example of this as well. What does it mean? And when do we usually use it? Well, the delay identification lead is used when the names of the main subjects are not as important as what those people did. So in the previous case, yes, Alice Cheney, these names are important, but we could also create a lead by moving them to the second paragraph, moving these names to the second paragraph. When do we use this delayed identification lead? When we say that, let's say, somebody participated in an accident and we don't know the person, so we can actually mention their name in the second paragraph. Or if there are multiple people involved in a crime, we can say how many people were involved in it, and then we can in the second and third paragraph list their names. So it doesn't need to be they don't need to be identified right away. You can identify them later if they're not important. If we're talking about prominent individuals, celebrities, people that others are aware of, then it's better to have their names in the lead of the story. So let's take a look at this example when we use what we call the delayed identification lead. So this example, I found it at the end of the year, at the end of 2024 on the Guardian website. The headline was Texas teenager accused of using poison to kill rivals competition show goat. Now, looking at this headline, remember when we were talking about news elements and what would make a story engaging or important or basically newsworthy. So some of the elements we talked about were, crime, conflict, things like that are intriguing and people want to read about it. So this is one such example, but also the story is very unusual. It is very strange for a teenager to be accused of animal cruelty. So let's take a look at the story. The lead of the story is a Texas teenager has been charged with animal cruelty after she was accused of using pesticide to poison and kill a rival's competition show goat. So you see, they didn't tell us what her name is in the first paragraph of the story, but they actually waited for the second paragraph to identify her. So the second paragraph is authorities allege that Aubrey Van Landingham, 17, used a Drench gun to force feed toxic pesticide to the goat named Willie at the barn at the Vista Ridge High School in Cedar Park in October. So, speaking of the delayed identification lead, for the exercise that you need to post before we meet in person, I want you to find two news stories that have the delayed identification lead. Don't use this example that I used in this lecture. So find it and then copy and paste that story into your into discussion. But please just copy and paste first and second paragraph. Don't copy and paste the entire story, but also provide the link for each story. So two examples I want to see, and just make sure to provide links and just copy and paste the first paragraph and then the paragraph where the person or people involved in that event that the news story is talking about are identified. So let's take a look at a few other examples of the summary lead. So basically, with summary leads, you just go straight to the point. You explain right away what happened without delaying it. So in this example, the World Health Organization has urged China to share data on the origins of the COVID pandemic 5 years on from its start in the city of Wuhan. I can't believe it's been 5 years. But this story is also straight to the point. This is what WHO is looking for, and this actually is happening 5 years after the pandemic, and so on. Another example is Donald Trump has endorsed Mike Johnson for another term as Speaker of the House of Representatives, following intense speculations that the Louisiana congressman could face a challenge amid unhappiness with his leadership among fellow Republicans. And one more example of the lead: talk of homicide is on the rise in films. Researchers have found in a trend they say could pose a health concern for adults and children. So these are some examples of the summary lead. And let's take a look at what are some of the main features. So like what is the sentence structure like in leads? Like what do we usually see? So one of the things that you can see based on all these examples that I showed you is that you need to follow the normal rules of punctuation, grammar, word usage, and verb tense. If an event occurred in the past, then your lead must be in the past tense. Also, leads must be complete sentences and should include all the necessary articles. When it comes to headlines, remember, like we avoid using indefinite or definite articles. So it's not the president, it's just president. It is not a bull, it is just bull when it comes to headlines. And we don't use periods in headlines. So we don't use a definite and indefinite articles, and we don't use periods. But when it comes to leads, story leads need to present complete sentences and they need to include all the necessary articles. So just remember the difference between the two. Most leads use subjects, verbs, object, word, order. Now, what are some other important things to consider if you want to make sure that your lead is effective? You need to be concise. That's why I show you a couple of examples, and although some leads were a bit longer, I urge you, and this is why it is so difficult to write them. I urge you to say as much as you can in fewer words. So try to be concise and be very specific. One person died, 7 people were injured, 2 people were killed. 20,000 were impacted by the snowstorm on East Coast, and so on. So just be as specific as possible. Use strong, active verbs. Emphasize the magnitude of the story. This is why if there are important numbers, we will report them straight away. We will report them in the lead of the story. Stress the unusual. Localize and update. So the unusual in the previous story was the teenager, what she did with the goat, and then localized and update. What does it mean? So if you're reporting, as I mentioned, the example of the snowstorm. So if you're reporting on the snowstorm on the East Coast, just focus on the community in which you're reporting. Focus on Westchester County or New York City or wherever you are, and then explain how it will affect that community, that area. Be objective and attribute opinions. So in the lead of the story, if there is somebody accusing another person of something else, like one politician is saying something about another politician, you need to attribute that information, especially opinions. So this is what person A said about person B. So it's their opinion. It's not something that you stated. If you think it's relevant for the lead of the story, just make sure to attribute it. And strive for simplicity. Remember, people want to know exactly what's happening from the first sentence and or the lead of the story. So they don't want to read it multiple times to understand. They want to understand it right away. And based on what you told them, based on that first paragraph in your headline, they will decide whether they're going to read your story or not. Some other tips: avoid beginning the lead with the attribution. So don't say President Donald Trump, blah, blah, said this, but say what he said first and then end your sentence by saying President Donald Trump said. President Donald Trump announced. Decide which facts are the most interesting and incorporate them in the lead. Remember when we discuss this example of a person who died when Tesla truck caught fire. So we started the sentence by saying that somebody was killed and several other people were injured. So that was the most important thing, because when we're speaking about tragedies, we really need to start with the number of victims, because that emphasizes the magnitude of the story, the impact it had, the tragedy that happens. We need to start with that. Do not place too much emphasis on the time and place at which a story occurred. So the first thing we need to know, and so this is why leads are so complicated to write, because not only that you are pressed by trying to answer these important questions that every news story needs to answer, 5 Ws plus H, but even the order in which you're answering these questions in the lead of the story is important. So you're not going to say in January, on January 1st, in front of Donald Trump's hotel in Las Vegas, one person. So you're not going to start that news story by saying, oh, this happened on Wednesday, on January 1st, in front of Donald Trump's Las Vegas hotel, when blah, blah. So instead, you will say one person died and several others were injured. Avoid creating lists in the lead. So I kind of thought that that news story, that lead with Joe Biden had like too many names, 3 names. I think it is not necessary really. And there are also stories when that I see, and this is an error, this is a mistake. It's not, it's actually not necessarily an error, but it's not a good way to go. For instance, when there are several people who are accused of robbery or murder or a similar crime, like you're not going to list all their names in the legal story, but you will say that this is how many people were involved, and then later you can list their names. So in general, just avoid creating lists in the lead. Or if you want to mention how um, several banks decided to do this or that, you're not going to list all their names in the lead of the story because it burdens the story, but you can say several major banks in the country decided to do this. Avoid exaggeration and rewrite leads to improve them. I remember this, especially when I was a young journalist. I would just work and work and work on a story lead for such a long time, because to really make sure that your lead looks good, you really need to rewrite it and keep removing those words. And this is the reason why we did rewriting sentences exercise, because the more you read these sentences, the more you see redundant words that you don't really need, and that when you remove, the meaning of your sentence remains the same. This is especially important for a story lead. Now, aside from summary leads, there are also alternative leads. They're very different. So they basically let journalists be creative, and we call these leads also soft leads. Most of the alternative leads begin with the story's most interesting details, such as it can be an anecdote, a description, quotation, or even a question. So there you see, they're very different than summary leads, where we want to go straight to the point, be clear and concise. No, alternative leads are a bit different. And they may run not one, but 4 to 5 paragraphs. Soft leads are followed by a nut graph, or a paragraph that states the central point of the story. And this nut graph serves some of the same functions as the summary news lead. Now, let's take a look at this example. So let's say this is like a comparison between the summary lead and the alternative lead for the same story. City officials Wednesday night debated the possibility of tax increase to erase the city's 6.7 million deficit. So what is it that we have here? It's basically the summary lead, and how the alternative lead for the same story looks like. Let's take a look at it. City officials are going to need a pretty big rabbit's foot to keep the city's budget in the black. Mayor Sabrina DiToli told the council during a budget meeting Wednesday night it will take a lot of luck to keep the city out of a financial hole next year. If we are lucky, healthcare costs and our other insurances won't have a big increase. If we are lucky, our tax revenues will come in higher than expected. They totally said. If we're unlucky, if the city is unlucky, it'll be looking at a deficit of more than 6.7 million. So you see, it basically an alternative lead runs for several runs like in this case, it is 4 paragraphs long. So in the fourth paragraph, we just learned that if the city is unlucky, it'll be looking at a deficit of more than 6.7 million, which is the information we learned about the moment we read the summary lead. So now let's take a look at another example. The summary lead in this case is pretty straightforward. Local government officials see the continued use of virtual meetings, which skyrocketed during the COVID-19 pandemic as a way of increasing civic engagement. So this lead goes straight to the point, and it would, as we mentioned, like in case of alternative leads, we create them in a way that we either use an anecdote, an example, a question, or a description to explain what the story is about. So we could write the alternatively this way. When Washington, D.C. re-enfranchised people serving time for felonies in 2020, Joel Casson, then at the D.C. Central Detention Facility, realized that not only could he now vote, he could also run for commissioner of his local advisory neighborhood commission, one of about 40 of the hyperlocal governing bodies in the district. And if he could find a way to participate in ANC meetings from jail, he could serve out his term in office. So you're likely to see both these leads in news stories online or in newspapers, but I think that summary leads are usually more difficult to write because they press you to be so concise and tell everything right away, which at the beginning, as you start your journalism career, is going to be difficult. But later you will find it easier and easier because it will be easier for you to identify what is the most important information for your story and make sure that that story, that information is in your lead. So let's just go over these two main concepts that I introduced you to today. Summary leads go straight to the point about what happened, be concise, specific, and strive for simplicity. In case of alternative leads, you use them when you want to be creative, when you think it's suitable to be creative. They may run 4 or 5 paragraphs, and alternative leads could start with an anecdote or a question or an example. So thank you very much. This is all that I had for you for today. Enjoy your day and see you soon. Bye-bye.